Good evening, friends. I am Dr. ASHOK Tripathi. Today, we are going to discuss American War of Independence. Earlier, I had posted the Hindi version of this video. Today, I am going to upload the English version. But before starting the discussions, I very humbly request you, please subscribe my channel and also post your comments. So now let us start the discussion. As you can see on your screens, today's topic is American War of Independence. Friends, when exploitation becomes intolerable, history takes a leap. On 4th July 1776, once again, the metal of this maxim was proved when the people of United States threw off the yoke of British predominance and declared themselves independent. Now we will discuss the causes of this revolution. The fundamental cause of the American Revolution, the fundamental cause of the American Revolution was the clash of divergent economic and political interests of Britain and America. In fact, after the Glorious Revolution in 1688, the British government had made no serious attempt to tighten its control over the colonies and followed policy of salutary neglect. In 1763, when the so-called Patriot King George III came to the throne, he thought in terms of tightening the grip over the American colonies. British Parliament uh, under George Grenville issued orders for the strict compliance of previously passed acts. In continuance with this, a number of acts were also passed, and the most important act among these was the Stamp Act 1765, which imposed a tax on every legal document, newspaper, and pamphlets, etc. According to George Washington, the Stamp Act imposed on the colonies by the Parliament of Great Britain is an ill-judged measure. Parliament has no right to put its hand into our pockets without our consent. This finds the dormant sparks of reaction into furious blaze. All the previous acts had affected only the mercantile community, but it had touched almost the entire population of America. Friends, it was a mistake on the part of British authorities of not realizing the facts. Firstly, the people who had deserted England and had settled in America had become Americans rather than, in the strict sense, Englishmen. Quoting Charles M. Andrews, new soil had produced new wants new desires, new points of view, and the colonists were demanding to live their own lives in their own way. Secondly, after uh, following a lenient policy for almost 70 years, a sudden change over to strictness was envying. And thirdly, after the end of French and Indian War, the Americans were feeling a pinch of post war depression, and at that juncture, the strict enforcements of these measures were going to aggravate hard times, and it aggravated. The growing discontentment of American people took the form of constitutional deadlock when the rebellious masses of America raised the slogan "No taxation without representation." You can see on your screens the slogan "No taxation without representation." They did not want that America would continue to remain an Eldorado of their dreams for their imperialistic adventurism without giving them due representation in the British Parliament. The war with France, which had on the one hand given an impetus to the British imperialistic ambitions, on the other hand, an opposite effect on the attitude of Americans. Now, they had gained confidence in their military power, and they were no more dependent on British for protection. So, the Americans expressed loudly their grievances against the repressive attitude of British government. The American patriots got an intellectual and moral support from the Gospels of John Locke. John Locke had declared that levying taxes on people without their consent was violation of the right of property, which was the natural right of man. The doctrine of laissez-faire of physiocrats also played an indirect role in the affair when it propounded that the governmental regulations on commerce should be lessened. Now the events had responded, yeah, sorry, now the events had reopened the immediate pretexts of war came from Tea Act, which was passed in 1773 by Lord North, which gave the East India Company an opportunity to sell its tea without paying usual taxes. Is it naked? This ignited the powder keg, as it were, and it was all ablaze. The war, I am not going in detail what happened during the war. The war is started, and after 4 years, with the surrender of British forces at Yorktown, 19th October 1781, came to an end. Now the dreams of American patriots had been realized. They had fought out and vowed their independence. This is not possible for me to give all the incidents and events which took place during the war. You can read in your books. Now we will discuss about the nature of American Revolution. Friends, Recent researches done regarding the causes of this revolution have brought forth many important facts. A school of historians under the leadership of Professor Bernard Bailyn of Harvard University, after a careful study of the pamphlet literature of the era, propounds that the American Revolution was an American reaction to the conspiracy of King George III to curb the civil rights of his subjects on both sides of Atlantic. Balin put it in the foreword to his most acclaimed work, The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. The name of the book of Bernard Bain is The Ideological Origins of the American Revolution. This book was first published in 1967. In this book, he says, study of the pamphlets confirmed my rather old-fashioned view that the American Revolution was, above all else, an ideological, constitutional, political struggle. What is of the opinion what Americans were really objecting, what Americans were really, you can see on your screens, what Americans were really objecting to had nothing to do with constitutional principles. Their objection was not to Parliament's constitutional right to levy certain kind of taxes as opposed to others, but to its effort to collect any. Now, so friends, another school of historians, we will talk about different opinions about the nature of this revolution. Another school of historians, after scrutinizing the crowd behavior in the colonial towns, has regarded this revolution as a class conflict, a revolt of the lower classes against the colonial aristocracy. So, uh, some historians are trying to associate this revolution with class struggle. Anyway, fresh researches are going on, and the historians have yet to accept the complete validity of these theories. But it is beyond doubt, and it is accepted by all historians, that the American Revolution was a revolt of masses against the British tyranny and economic repression, and was an epoch-making event whose tremors were felt in all corners of the globe. Lord Acton has aptly regarded it as the greatest revolution that had ever broken out among civilized men. Now, uh, what were the consequences of American War of Independence? Uh, Let us discuss the consequences of American War of Independence. The American War of Independence is supposed to be a landmark in the history of modern world. Its consequences were far-reaching. 13 of Great Britain's North American colonies won political independence and went on to form the United States of America. In the country, it led to an independent sovereign republic with the reigning affirmation of faith in human rights. It was the victory of the ideals of liberty and equality over imperialism. Another important effect of the revolution was that from then onwards, uh, the leadership was no longer a monopoly of aristocratic class. Famous historian R. Palmer had supported this fact with the datum that the percentage of moderate legislators in the colonial assemblies before the revolution was 17%, but after the revolution it rose to 62%. The most profound effect of the revolution in social fabric of the nation was beginning of a widespread movement for the abolition of slavery. Liberalism, which was the keystone of the revolutionary philosophy, had its bearing upon the masses also, and a number of anti-slavery societies were framed, uh, framed low, though it is another thing that it took a complete 1 century to root out this social evil. The War of Independence had two more effects on the socio-religious life of the country. At the close of the war, the properties of the royalists were confiscated and sold at a very low rate, and this was the last nail in the coffin of royalist aspirations. And in the religious sphere, there developed a spirit of religious toleration among all the sects, but the Anglican Church went its all-time low in America. Some compliments of decline in moral and religious standards in America were also found uh, after the revolution, but the historians uh, take it as a thing that occurs after almost every revolution or every war. The efforts of American War of Independence were not confined only to American territory, but they had global dimensions. The American Revolution was the first episode in a long revolutionary period extending from about 1770 through the long European revolutions of 1848 and principally marked by the Great French Revolution of 1789. But Georges Lefebvre, an eminent French historian, has tried to prove that the American Revolution was closer to the English revolutions than the French Revolution because the American Revolution, according to him, was concerned primarily with liberty, whereas equality was the aim of French Revolution. This view is unacceptable to the American historians. For example, R. R. Palmer is of the view that Lefebvre greatly underestimated the importance of American Revolution, and through the excerpts from the American Declaration of Independence, he tries to show that not only liberty but also equality was the aim of American Revolution. The quantum of the relation between American and French Revolution is not so important, but this much is certain that the American Revolution, being the first case of the breakup of a European empire, showed paths to the revolutionaries of Europe and Latin America and their crusade against imperialism. Quoting once again R. R. Palmer, the independence of the United States set a precedent for an act of rebellion. It showed men fighting, living dangerously, and dying for their rights. So, thank you, friends. I hope uh, you will like this lecture, and if so, then please uh, comment on this lecture. Once again, I thank you. Good night.